It begins in a moment so small that most people would never notice it. A breath held too long, a thought that refuses to settle, a quiet tension in the hands, as if the fingers are trying to grasp something invisible and keep it from slipping away. In that tiny tension lies the entire story of human suffering, the instinct to control what cannot be controlled, to shape the world into an image that matches our fear, to hold back the tide with nothing but our will. And you feel it even now, whether you admit it or not. That tightening inside you whenever life moves in a direction you did not choose. That urge to contain, to predict, to dominate, to hold. It is the silent struggle you carry every day, and if you listen closely, you can hear the whisper underneath it all. If I don't hold on, everything will fall apart. This is where the illusion begins. The illusion that your grasp determines the universe, that chaos obeys your command, that life owes you stability simply because you demand it. But the truth is older and heavier than any modern anxiety. Life does not bend to the will of fear. It moves with its own rhythm, shaped by forces you will never fully see, and the more you try to control those forces, the more they slip through your fingers. Human beings, from the beginning of time, believed that mastery over their environment would free them from suffering. They built tools, machines, systems, civilizations, thinking they could outrun uncertainty. Yet the uncertainty remained. It always remained, because control was never real. Only the feeling of control was. Inside every person, there is a frightened architect trying to redesign the universe. The architect tries to control weather, fate, people, outcomes, judgments, possibilities, and time, as if existence were clay waiting to be molded into perfection. You've felt this architect inside you when plans don't go your way, and suddenly you feel a tremor of frustration, as if the world has betrayed you. You've felt it when someone behaves differently than you hoped, and a quiet anger rises, because deep down you believe their behavior belonged to you. You've felt it when life surprised you, not with chaos, but with change. And even change that doesn't harm you can feel like a violation when you are addicted to control. The Stoics understood this addiction long before modern psychology gave it names. They saw how humans cling to the illusion that they can command outcomes the way an emperor commands soldiers. But the Stoics noticed something else. A subtle truth hidden beneath human desire. The more a person tries to control everything, the more they end up controlled by everything. A person who tries to control the world becomes enslaved to every unpredictable event. They become emotionally vulnerable to every shift in the wind, every delay, every imperfection. And life, being life, shifts constantly. Thus the cycle begins. The world moves, the person resists. The resistance creates suffering, the suffering creates fear, and fear intensifies the need to control. The loop is infinite unless broken by wisdom. Alan Watts described this cycle as a dance. Humans trying to dictate the steps instead of learning to move with the music. He noticed that people try to hold life still, like grabbing the river with both hands. But the river is not meant to be held, it is meant to be entered, to be felt, to be allowed. Control is the attempt to freeze the world into a still image, but the world is alive, breathing, shifting, flowing. And when you try to stop life from moving, you end up trapped by your own hands, exhausted from fighting currents that were never meant to obey you. Why do humans try to control everything? The answer is simpler and more tragic than we wish it to be. Because humans fear the unknown more than they value freedom. The unknown terrifies the mind because it exposes our smallness. It reminds us that for all our intelligence, we are still fragile creatures in a universe too vast to predict. So the mind invents the illusion of control as a shield, a fantasy that convinces you that life is safer than it really is. You predict, you plan, you calculate, you cling to routines because somewhere inside you believe that prediction equals power. But prediction is not power. Prediction is only hope disguised as strategy. Control is not authority. Control is only anxiety, pretending to be strength. The deeper truth is that the human mind confuses stability with safety. We think that if life remains stable, then nothing can harm us. But the Stoics realized that safety does not come from stability. It comes from adaptability. A tree does not survive storms because the world bends around its wishes, but because the tree itself bends. Humans suffer not because the world is unpredictable, but because humans refuse to bend with it. We try to hold our identities rigid, our plans rigid, our expectations rigid. And rigidity in a world of constant change is the first step toward breaking. If you look closely, you can see the illusion manifesting in your daily behaviors. Consider how you feel when someone takes too long to reply. You don't just feel annoyed, you feel threatened. Threatened by what you cannot control, by what you cannot know. Consider how you feel when traffic halts your progress. You don't merely feel delayed, you feel insulted, as though the world should have moved according to your schedule. Consider how you react when plans collapse unexpectedly. You don't simply adjust, you crumble, because your sense of inner stability was tied to an external structure that was never yours to command. This is where suffering breeds in the gap between what we expect and what reality offers. The more we expect the world to conform to our desires, the more fragile we become. Fragility does not come from weakness, but from misplaced attachment. When we attach our peace to things we do not control, we build emotional houses on foundations made of sand. A single wave can destroy them, and life is full of waves. The Stoics warned against this not because they wanted people to be indifferent or unfeeling, but because they understood the design of nature. Nothing external was ever promised to you. Control is borrowed if it exists at all, and it is taken away the moment you believe it is yours. Look deeper still and you will discover that the illusion of control is rooted in a misunderstanding of identity. Humans believe they are separate from the world, standing outside it, trying to manage it like a puppeteer manipulating strings. But Stoicism and the teachings of Watts reveal a more profound reality. You are part of the world, not above it. You are a thread in the tapestry, not the weaver. And because you are part of the tapestry, you can influence, participate, shape, but you cannot dominate its entirety. To try is to misunderstand your place in the cosmic order. The illusion of control is also tied to the ego's desperate need for certainty. The ego thrives on the idea that it knows what will happen. But certainty is a myth. The more you seek it, the further it recedes. Humans chase certainty the way a thirsty man chases a mirage in the desert, and every time it dissolves, we blame ourselves, thinking we failed to plan correctly. But the failure was not in planning, the failure was in believing that life can be predicted with perfect clarity. The world is not a puzzle to be solved or a machine to be optimized. The world is an unfolding phenomenon, dynamic and breathing. Even your emotions reveal the illusion. Every time you feel fear, anger, jealousy, insecurity, heartbreak, or disappointment, there is a hidden element beneath the emotion. A desire for control. You are angry because something violated your expectation. You are jealous because someone's choices escaped your influence. You are heartbroken because a person or future you imagined slipped beyond your grip. You are anxious because tomorrow refuses to obey your predictions. When the illusion of control collapses, the raw truth of life emerges, painful, uncertain, and real. But inside this truth lies an unlocking, a quiet liberation. Because once you see the illusion clearly, something inside you loosens. You stop demanding that the world be obedient. You stop begging the universe to follow your script. You stop believing you must maintain a constant grip on everything. You begin to exhale for the first time in your life. And in that exhale, a new possibility appears, something calmer, wiser, and freer than anything control could ever offer. And so part one ends where it began, with that tiny tension in your hands, that unspoken fear tightening inside your chest. The tension does not need to be conquered, it needs to be understood. For suffering does not arise from chaos, but from the refusal to accept that chaos will always exist. Let the story unfold now, deeper and wider through the next parts, into the heart of the illusion, through the failure of control, and toward the hidden wisdom waiting beneath it all. There comes a moment in every human life when the illusion begins to fracture, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, almost unnoticeable shift. It may happen on an ordinary morning when something small refuses to follow your expectations. Perhaps a plan collapses, or a person you relied upon withdraws, or life simply turns left when you wanted it to turn right. In that tiny disruption, a deeper truth emerges like a figure stepping out of the shadows. The world does not move according to your grip. It never did. And in that realization, if you listen closely, you can hear the first crack in the illusion of control. But rather than accepting this truth, humans often respond with more control. It is our instinct. When life slips away from our grasp, we tighten the grip further. We plan more aggressively. We predict more obsessively. We analyze possibilities, overthink scenarios, rehearse outcomes as though mental rehearsal could force the universe into obedience. We do not realize that every attempt to tighten control deepens our suffering because it strengthens the illusion rather than dissolving it. The ancient Stoics observed this pattern thousands of years ago. They saw that humans do not suffer from events, but from their judgments about events, judgments born from the desire to command reality. When something unexpected happens, the instinctive human response is not acceptance but resistance. This resistance is disguised as strategy or responsibility, but beneath the surface it is simply fear. Humans try to control because they are terrified of being powerless, and the tragedy is that this terror creates exactly the thing they are trying to avoid. Imagine someone gripping a rope tied to a moving ship. The harder they pull to stop the ship, the more they are dragged across the dock. Instead of releasing the rope, they believe pulling harder will provide safety. But safety does not come from resisting movement. It comes from understanding when to release the rope. Control in this way becomes a self-inflicted wound, and the wound grows deeper each time we refuse to let go. The illusion strengthens because modern life encourages it. People are taught that success comes from control of schedules, control of outcomes, control of reputation, control of emotions, control of relationships. But this pursuit secretly exhausts the soul. It forces a person to carry burdens they were never designed to carry. Stoicism teaches that control of the self is noble, control of the world is impossible. Yet humans invert this truth. They neglect control of the self while attempting to dominate everything else. This creates a life shaped not by wisdom, but by fear. Fear of failure, fear of chaos, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty. Fear that without control, we might have to face our own limitations. And this is perhaps the most frightening truth of all. Humans fear their own vulnerability so deeply that they construct entire lives devoted to hiding it. Control becomes the mask, the shield, the armor. But armor is heavy. It weighs down the spirit until even walking through an ordinary day feels like a battle. Alan Watts often described control as a form of tension, a refusal to trust the natural unfolding of life. He noticed that humans behave like a person who tries to steer the ocean, anxiously pushing against waves, attempting to straighten currents, believing that if they work hard enough, the sea will submit. The irony is that this constant striving creates the very inner storm we hope to avoid. We do not realize that the ocean needs no steering, because its movement does not threaten us, it only threatens our illusion. What happens when humans fail to control everything? At first, panic. The mind, conditioned to believe in its power, interprets the collapse of control as catastrophe. But after the panic fades, something subtler appears, a strange sense of relief. When the plans fall apart, when the expectations shatter, when the grip fails and life moves on its own path, there is a quiet freedom hidden inside the chaos. Part of you recognizes that the world did not end when control slipped away. Part of you realizes that control was never the source of safety. Part of you feels lighter. This is the paradox of the illusion. The more we fail at controlling everything, the closer we come to discovering peace. Failure becomes a teacher disguised as chaos. It forces us to confront the truth that control is not strength, wisdom is. Strength is found not in domination but in flexibility. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that a wise person does not seek to force the world into order, but seeks to cultivate an inner order that can withstand the world's unpredictability. To understand why humans try to control, you must go deeper into the structure of the mind. The mind is always trying to predict. It uses patterns from the past to anticipate the future. This is not inherently wrong, it is a survival mechanism. But when prediction becomes obsession, survival becomes suffering. The mind begins to treat uncertainty as danger and begins to treat control as salvation. Thus, humans start controlling things not because they need to, but because they believe they must. But life does not reward this belief. The more tightly you cling to control, the more frequently life reminds you of its limits. Plans fail, people change, bodies weaken, circumstances shift. Just when you think you have mastered everything, something unexpected arrives, not as punishment, but as a reminder that control was only ever temporary. Human suffering does not arise because life is unpredictable. It arises because humans demand that it be predictable. You can see this illusion in relationships. People try to control how they are perceived. They try to manage how others behave. They try to dictate emotional outcomes. But relationships are not machines that respond to commands. They are living exchanges shaped by countless unseen variables. When someone does not respond the way you hoped, you may feel rejected or unimportant, not because of the event itself, but because of the expectation you tried to control. You can see the illusion in ambitions. People create timelines for success, then suffer when life refuses to follow the timeline. The suffering comes not from failure, but from the belief that the timeline was yours to command. Life may give you what you seek, but not when or how you demand it. This is not cruelty, it is simply the nature of reality, and you can see the illusion in identity. People try to control how they are viewed, trying to curate themselves into an image that cannot be criticized. But the world will always judge. You cannot control the thoughts of billions of minds. The attempt to do so is a direct path to exhaustion. The Stoics taught that you can control your character, but not your reputation. The modern world reversed this wisdom, causing endless suffering. Part 2. Once you begin to see the illusion clearly, something shifts. Every moment that once frustrated you becomes a philosophical mirror. The delayed reply, the unexpected detour, the unwanted change, the broken plan. Instead of reacting with anger or anxiety, you see each moment as life reminding you of truth. Your peace was never meant to depend on prediction. The failure of control reveals the wisdom of acceptance. Acceptance does not mean surrendering ambition or becoming passive. It means understanding the limits of your ownership. You own your actions, not the outcomes. You own your efforts, not the results. You own your decisions, not the universe's response. This distinction is the doorway to freedom. Humans try to control everything and fail, not because they are weak, but because the universe was never designed to be commanded. Life is not a machine, it is a relationship, and relationships cannot be controlled, they can only be navigated. Just as a sailor cannot control the wind but can adjust the sails, humans cannot control life's events but can shape their responses. This is where true strength lies. In the collapse of control, in the moment when life defies your expectations, you are invited to see the truth that Stoicism has always whispered. You cannot command the world, but you can command yourself. And that is enough. That is more than enough. There comes a moment in every human story when the illusion of control becomes heavier than the life it was supposed to protect. A moment when the mind, exhausted from the struggle of rearranging the universe to fit its fragile expectations, begins to crack under the weight of its own demands. And it is precisely in this moment of breaking, this quiet collapse that humans rarely admit out loud, where the truth begins to appear not as a relief but as an unsettling revelation. Because what collapses is not life itself, but the false architecture we built around life, the belief that if we think harder, prepare more obsessively, plan more aggressively, we can prevent anything from slipping through our hands, yet the slipping seems to accelerate the tighter we hold, just as sand escapes more quickly when clenched in a fist. It is here, in the cracks between intention and reality, where the human psyche begins its trembling dance between fear and awakening. We begin to see that our attempts to control everything are not the result of strength, but of fear disguised as discipline. Fear of chaos, fear of change, fear of losing what we love, fear of facing the unknown future, and most deeply, fear of confronting the truth that we are far less powerful than we pretend to be. Humans don't chase control because they want power. Humans chase control because they are terrified of vulnerability. And vulnerability is the one condition of existence that no one escapes, no matter how carefully they architect their lives. But the mind does not surrender easily. Even when life repeatedly proves that outcomes are not ours to command, the mind persists in believing it can outthink fate. It constructs scenarios, rehearses catastrophes, creates elaborate strategies for preventing imaginary problems. This is where the illusion becomes most subtle and most dangerous, the belief that worry is a form of preparation, that anxiety is a type of caution, that rehearsing fear somehow protects us from fear. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. Worry does not prevent disaster, it only prevents peace. Anxiety does not prepare us for the future, it only steals the present. Catastrophe rehearsal does not reduce suffering, it only multiplies it long before anything has even happened. The Stoics warned of this mental trap long ago, observing how the mind becomes its own tormentor by attempting to control external circumstances that do not belong to us. They understood that suffering increases not because life is cruel, but because the human mind insists on resisting the nature of reality. We want permanence in a world built on impermanence. We want clarity in a world shaped by uncertainty. We want guarantees in a world that offers only possibilities. So we struggle not because life is unkind, but because we try to extract certainty from something that was never meant to be certain. It is like trying to gather water with a net. The harder we try, the more it escapes. The irony is that this illusion of control is seductive precisely because it sometimes works. We see small victories, plans that unfold smoothly, goals that materialize, predictions that come true. And from these scattered successes, the mind constructs the belief that control is not only possible but mandatory. But these small victories are exceptions, not rules. They are moments when the river of life happened to flow in the direction we preferred, and we mistake alignment with ownership. We mistake coincidence with mastery. And from this misunderstanding, we build a false confidence that later becomes a painful disappointment when life shifts again, as it always does. Alan Watts often said that life is like swimming. The more rigidly you try to stay afloat, the more you sink. But when you relax, you rise naturally. Control is rigidity, acceptance is buoyancy. The Stoics express the same idea in a different language, teaching that peace arises not from bending the universe to our will, but from aligning our will with the universe. To them, tranquility was not found in mastery over circumstances, but in mastery over the self, in understanding what belongs to you and what does not, what depends on you and what never will. And yet modern life pushes people in the opposite direction, teaching them that control is not only possible, but required for success, security, happiness, and survival. We worry about time, yet we cannot slow it. We fear aging, yet we cannot pause it. We fight change, yet we cannot stop it. We try to control people, their thoughts, feelings, behaviors, yet they remain stubbornly independent of our wishes. We attempt to manipulate outcomes, only to discover that the world is too vast, too interconnected, too unpredictable for any one person to govern. And in the midst of all this struggle, something inside us begins to tremble, a small whisper rising from the depths saying, "This is not the way." But the whisper is soft, easily drowned out by the noise of expectations placed upon us since childhood. We were raised in a world that teaches achievement but not acceptance, ambition but not surrender, planning but not presence. We were taught that control equals responsibility, that letting go equals negligence, that uncertainty equals failure. And so we move through life like wrestlers grappling with shadows, fighting battles that cannot be won because they were never meant to be fought. The deeper tragedy is not that humans fail to control life, but that in the attempt they lose themselves, they lose their inner calm to anxiety, their joy to perfectionism, their relationships to unspoken expectations, their dreams to fear of failure. The pursuit of control becomes a silent thief, stealing years of peace in exchange for illusions of safety. And yet, as the Stoics understood, the safety we seek through control is not real safety at all. True safety comes not from guaranteeing outcomes, but from strengthening the mind to face any outcome. It comes not from bending the external world, but from shaping the internal one. There is a curious moment that always arrives in the life of someone who has spent years trying to control everything, a moment when exhaustion becomes clarity. When the mind, worn out from endless predictions and calculations, stops thrashing long enough to notice something it had overlooked. A quiet truth that sits beneath all the chaos. Life is not trying to be controlled. Life is trying to be experienced. The world does not resist us out of hostility. It simply follows its own nature. And when we stop resisting the nature of things, suffering loosens its grip. This is where transformation begins. Not from conquering the world, but from understanding it. Not from dominating circumstances, but from participating in them. Not from forcing outcomes, but from flowing with the rhythms of a world that is infinitely larger, wiser, and more unpredictable than we imagined. The illusion begins to fade not when we lose control, but when we realize we never had it. And so, in this shift of understanding, the mind begins to soften. Not collapse, not retreat, but soften. It begins to see that control was never peace. Control was only tension dressed as protection. It begins to see that what it feared most, uncertainty, is not an enemy, but simply a feature of existence. It begins to see that the world becomes less threatening not when we hold tighter, but when we stop fighting its nature. And in this subtle, quiet awakening, a new form of strength emerges, one rooted not in domination but in alignment, a strength that does not tremble before change, a strength that does not collapse under the weight of unpredictability, a strength that does not seek to own life but to meet it fully, a strength the Stoics understood deeply, the strength of acceptance. There is a strange calm that enters the human soul when the illusion of control begins to dissolve, not a dramatic surrender, not a collapse, but a kind of inward quiet that feels both unfamiliar and inevitable. It is the silence that follows years of internal noise, the stillness that finally emerges when the mind grows tired of its endless attempts to rearrange reality. This calm does not come as a reward, but as a recognition, a gentle shift in the way one breathes, observes, and participates in life. It is the dawning awareness that control was never the requirement for peace, clarity was. And clarity begins the moment we stop trying to dominate life and instead begin to understand it. As this awareness spreads through the mind, something remarkable happens. Life, which once felt like a raging storm to be navigated with fear and calculation, begins to feel more like an ocean whose waves rise and fall according to their own nature. And like any ocean, it becomes clear that the goal was never to stop the waves, but to learn how to ride them, to move with them rather than against them, to understand that the wave does not exist to harm you, it simply exists. When this shift takes place, the human heart moves from a stance of resistance to one of rhythm, from tension to flow. And in this state of flow, the world appears different, not softer, not easier, but more comprehensible. The Stoics taught that the essence of freedom lies not in shaping external events, but in shaping our internal responses. They knew that the world behaves according to its own logic, not ours, and that peace comes from harmonizing with that logic. But this harmony requires a profound transformation, the restructuring of the inner world. Letting go of control does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming precise about what is truly yours to influence and what never was. It means stepping out of the fog of imagined power and seeing clearly the boundary between what depends on you and what does not. And once that boundary becomes clear, a strange liberation begins to grow. The liberation starts small. A thought that used to trigger panic now produces only a quiet observation. An unexpected change no longer sends the mind spiraling into fear, but instead awakens curiosity. A setback that once felt like a personal failure now appears simply as an event unfolding in a much larger story. With each shift, the mind becomes more spacious, less cluttered with the heavy furniture of expectations and imagined catastrophes. It begins to see that much of its suffering came not from the world, but from the frantic movements it made in response to the world. Then, gradually, a deeper transformation takes root, one that touches every part of one's existence. It reshapes relationships, not because people become easier to manage, because the need to manage them dissolves. It softens the heart, not because pain disappears, but because the fear of pain lessens. It strengthens decision-making, not because outcomes become predictable, but because one no longer demands perfect outcomes before taking action. This is the strength born of acceptance, a strength not rooted in force but in clarity. Life begins to feel broader, more alive, more honest. The pressure to choreograph every detail weakens, and the individual discovers something they had forgotten: the ability to breathe deeply, to watch the world without immediately interpreting it, to act without overthinking every possible reaction, to live without constantly scanning for threats. The relief is not dramatic, it is subtle, like discovering that a weight you carried for years has suddenly been set down behind you, and only now do you realize how heavy it had been. In this new space of clarity, the human mind becomes capable of noticing something it had overlooked in its years of grasping, that uncertainty is not merely something to tolerate, but something that makes life vibrant. Without uncertainty, there is no adventure, no discovery, no growth, no wonder. A life fully controlled would be a life without surprise, without mystery, without depth. It would be a life stripped of the very qualities that make existence meaningful. The irony is striking. Humans chase control to feel safe, yet the greatest beauty in life comes from that which is uncontrollable. When this truth sinks in even just faintly, a new form of appreciation arises. Rain no longer feels like an inconvenience, it feels like participation in the natural world. Delays no longer feel like personal punishments, they become pauses that reveal the pace of existence. Loss no longer appears as an aberration, it becomes understood as a natural transition, painful but woven into the fabric of life. Nothing becomes easier, not the world, not the challenges, not the storms, but the relationship with these things changes completely. Alan Watts often spoke about the dance of life, how everything moves according to a rhythm that transcends human intention. The Stoics spoke of living in accord with nature, aligning oneself with the deeper order of the world. Both teachings converge here, in the realization that life is not a machine to be engineered, but a mystery to be engaged with. The control we seek is not control at all, it is resistance to the natural flow of things. And once resistance fades, even slightly, life begins to reveal itself in ways previously unseen. The individual who once lived in constant tension begins to move differently. Not slower, not faster, but more consciously, more fluidly. Decisions come from clarity rather than fear. Actions arise from purpose rather than pressure. Difficulties, instead of collapsing the mind, become opportunities to practice resilience, patience, and wisdom. The internal storm quiets, not because the world outside calms, but because the mind no longer throws itself against the winds. And yet the journey is not about eliminating desire, ambition, or direction. It is not a retreat from life, but a deeper entrance into it. Letting go of control allows the individual to act with more intention, not less. To pursue goals with more passion, not less. To love more freely, not fearfully. When control loosens, authenticity grows. When grasping fades, presence emerges. When fear diminishes, connection deepens. This is the hidden gift of surrender, not a loss of agency, but the emergence of a more natural form of agency, one rooted in clarity rather than desperation. As the individual continues to move through life with this evolving awareness, they begin to notice something profound: that the world, once perceived as an adversary to be tamed, now appears as a partner. Each moment becomes a conversation, not a battle. Each change becomes a message, not a threat. Each failure becomes a lesson, not a sentence. The illusion of control melts, revealing a deeper truth. Life was never trying to be controlled, it was trying to be met. And in finally meeting life as it is, not as the mind insists it should be, the human being discovers an unexpected peace. A peace not dependent on perfect circumstances, but on an inner alignment that remains steady even as the world shifts. A peace born not from dominance, but from understanding. Not from mastery over the external, but from mastery over the internal. There comes a final stage in this quiet inner transformation, a moment when the mind begins to understand not only the futility of control, but also the beauty of releasing it. This moment is not a dramatic awakening or some grand revelation that shatters the world. It is a gentle unfolding, like dawn slowly pushing back the darkness. It is the mind's gradual recognition that life has never asked to be gripped, only held, never demanded to be solved, only understood, never required to be conquered, only lived. And in this soft realization, the last remnants of the illusion begin to fall away. As this understanding deepens, the human being starts to see the world with new eyes. The same life that once felt overwhelming now appears simply vast. The same unpredictability that once felt threatening now seems natural. The same emotions that once felt unbearable now become experiences to be welcomed and learned from. It is as though the individual has stepped out of a narrow corridor into an open landscape, and the space around them is filled not with danger but possibility. This is the shift from fear to participation, from resistance to engagement, from control to clarity. And yet the paradox at the heart of this transformation reveals itself even more clearly. By releasing control, one becomes more capable. The mind that was once choked by anxiety becomes capable of deeper insight. The heart that was once guarded becomes capable of deeper connection. The person who once hesitated at every turn for fear of unpredictable outcomes becomes capable of decisive action rooted in authenticity rather than fear. This is not a loss of power, but the discovery of a new, more stable kind of power, the power of alignment, the power of presence, the power of responding rather than reacting. Humans chase control because they misunderstand the nature of suffering. We believe suffering comes from external events, from situations outside our influence, from things that break, leave, shift, or surprise us. But suffering arises within us long before the world touches us. It comes from the desperate demand for reality to behave according to our preferences. It comes from the tension between what is and what we insist it must be, and the tighter this insistence becomes, the more fragile we feel. When the mind tries to control everything, it becomes a prisoner of its own expectations. Letting go of control is not a rejection of responsibility, It is the beginning of real responsibility. The Stoics understood this with clarity, that true responsibility lies only in what is ours and nothing more. Our choices, our judgments, our effort, our virtue, these things lie within our domain, and through them we shape the essence of our lives. But everything else, the actions of others, the outcomes of our work, the unfolding of the world, belongs to a realm we do not govern. When this truth is accepted, the heart begins to soften and the mind begins to settle. We stop fighting battles that were never ours to fight. Alan Watts once said that the more we try to separate ourselves from the world, the more trapped we become. The more we try to stand apart, the more we feel isolated. The more we try to control the flow of life, the more we feel swept away by it. But when we allow ourselves to become part of the flow, not passive, but present, we begin to move with the current rather than against it. This is the essence of the freedom that emerges when control dissolves, not drifting aimlessly, but navigating consciously. In this final understanding, something else becomes clear. What humans truly seek is not control, but stability, not dominance, but security, not prediction, but peace. And we try to manufacture these things by controlling as many pieces of life as possible. But stability does not come from tightening our grip on the world. It comes from loosening our grip on fear. Security does not arise from predicting the future. It arises from trusting our ability to meet whatever the future brings. Peace does not come from controlling external circumstances. It comes from accepting internal truth. As the mind begins to see this, the frantic searching slows. The restless desire to engineer every moment becomes unnecessary. Life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a companion to walk alongside. Even the difficult moments begin to change in tone, not suddenly pleasant, but meaningful. Challenges become invitations to grow, moments of loss become reminders of impermanence, and the unpredictability of life becomes a teacher rather than a threat. The external world does not transform, the internal world does. And in this new internal world, the illusion of control no longer holds the same power. It becomes something you can see clearly, like a mirage shimmering in the distance. You recognize why you once chased it, why it seemed so necessary, why you clung to it so fiercely. But now you see through it. You understand that control was never the path to freedom, it was the barrier. The world was never meant to bend to your will, it was meant to meet you halfway. And in meeting the world as it is, you find a depth of peace that control never offered. There is a serenity in knowing that you cannot stop the waves, and you do not need to. There is a strength in knowing that you cannot control the actions of others, and you do not need to. There is a quiet power in realizing that you cannot predict the future, and you do not need to. What you need is already within you, the ability to choose your response, to shape your character, to return to clarity, to breathe into the present moment rather than resist it. And so the journey ends not with a conclusion, but with an opening, not with an answer, but with an understanding. The illusion of control fades, and in its place arises a clearer, softer truth. That life is not mastered through force, but through alignment. Not through domination, but through awareness. Not through gripping, but through allowing. The world will continue to change. People will continue to surprise us. Plans will continue to shift. Outcomes will remain uncertain. But you, now clearer in your understanding, no longer collapse under this reality. You walk with it. You breathe with it. You participate in it. And in this participation, you discover the quiet strength that the Stoics spoke of, a strength grounded not in prediction, but in presence, not in control, but in wisdom, not in holding tightly, but in letting go gently and stepping forward anyway. In the end, peace does not come from bending the world to match your expectations. Peace comes from releasing those expectations and allowing the world to be what it is, while you become who you were meant to be, aware, grounded, resilient, and free. And with that understanding, you step back into the flow of life, not as someone who seeks to control it, but as someone who is finally ready to live it.